When you picture ancient Persian civilization, your mind probably jumps to grand architecture or like these vast historical empires.
Oh, definitely. That's the standard image.
Right. But arguably, their most incredible achievement was completely hidden underground.
Ah, yeah. The water system.
Exactly. For millennia, they sustained thriving agriculture in some of the most arid environments on Earth. And they used these brilliant gravity-fed irrigation tunnels called aqueducts.
It's engineering that really worked with the environment rather than against it.
Yeah, they mapped out exactly what the land could sustainably provide, and they just lived within those bounds. But you look at Iran today, and that ancient harmony is just entirely gone.
It really is.
The sources we're diving into today describe this terrifying modern reality, which they call a state of complete water bankruptcy.
And, bankruptcy is a word that really captures the severity of the situation way better than, say, drought or shortage.
Because a shortage implies it's temporary.
Right. Right. A shortage is a dip. Like a really good rainy season might fix a shortage. But water bankruptcy is this condition where the consumption of water has so wildly outpaced the renewable inflows that the system reaches this point of near irreversibility.
Like financial bankruptcy, the debts are just too high.
Exactly. They are basically spending natural capital they simply do not have. They're liquidating thousands of years of geological savings in just a few decades.
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a stack of incredibly detailed research, policy documents, and economic analyses.
Really comprehensive stuff.
Yeah, and they all point to one massive conclusion. As Iran navigates toward a sustainable democratic future, the single most critical hurdle and simultaneously the biggest opportunity is a comprehensive reform of its agricultural sector.
And I think it's important to note right up front for everyone listening, we are analyzing these political and historical events strictly through the lens of agricultural and economic impact.
We're not taking political sides here.
No, not at all. Our goal here is just to map the mechanics of the crisis, understand the behavioral economics at play, and look at the proposed blueprint for recovery that the sources lay out.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because we really have to understand the conflict at the heart of this collapse.
We do.
You have a region with this rich, sustainable legacy. But over the past few decades, that legacy was essentially strip-mined. The sources argue that complete structural overhaul is the only path forward.
Yeah.
So where did the modern system go so wrong?
Well, to grasp the proposed reforms, we kind of have to look at the post-1979 agricultural ideology.
Okay.
Following the revolution, the agricultural sector was fundamentally reframed. It wasn't just about feeding people anymore. It became like the vanguard of national independence.
A political tool, basically.
Very much so. The government adopted this strict, uncompromising ideology of food self-sufficiency. This meant prioritizing the domestic production of staple crops, especially these incredibly water-intensive ones like wheat and sugarcane, at almost any cost.
And when you say at any cost, the cost was the water itself.
Yeah, the mechanism here was heavily subsidized energy and water.
Okay, wait, how does subsidizing energy destroy the water?
Well, when a government makes the electricity required to run deep water pumps artificially cheap, they remove the natural economic barrier to over-extraction.
Oh, I see. Because normally pumping water from 1,000 feet underground would just be way too expensive to justify growing cheap wheat.
Precisely. Under normal market conditions, the math doesn't work. But with the state footing the bill for the electricity, farmers were basically incentivized to drill deeper and deeper. They were extracting uncapped amounts of groundwater to grow thirsty crops in what is essentially a desert.
That is wild, and there is a staggering statistic from the text that perfectly illustrates this. Right now, agriculture consumes about 90% of Iran's total water.
90%? Let that sink in.
Right, 90%.
Right.
But it contributes a meager 8% to the country's GDP. 90% of the water for 8% of the economy.
It's a massive systemic misallocation of resources.
It really is. It's like a manufacturing company spending 90% of its budget to produce their own cardboard boxes in-house just to avoid buying them from a supplier while the actual factory burns down around them.
That's a great analogy, actually.
But I do have to push back a little here. Is the drive for self-sufficiency inherently flawed?
How do you mean?
Well, global supply chains are incredibly fragile. I mean, we've seen them break down repeatedly in recent years. Isn't wanting to produce your own food a reasonable national security goal, especially for a country that's under heavy international sanctions?
I mean, it sounds incredibly logical on the surface. Of course, you want to feed your own people, but the sources highlight there's a vital distinction between food self-sufficiency and food security.
Okay, break that down for me.
Politicians love to blur the two, but operationally they are entirely different. Food self-sufficiency is a rigid, productionist approach. It demands that a country produces everything domestically, completely ignoring the environmental or economic toll.
It's obsessed with the origin of the food.
Exactly. The "we grew it here" badge of honor. But true food security, as defined by organizations like the FAO, focuses on access.
Access over origin.
Right. Food security means that all people, at all times, have equitable, reliable access to sufficient and nutritious food. It makes absolutely no assumptions about where that food was actually grown.
So, like, who would be a good example of that?
Consider countries like the United Kingdom or Japan. They produce less than 80% of their own food.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that low.
Yeah, so they are technically not self-sufficient, but they are highly food secure because they have diverse economies and really reliable trade networks.
I get it. So you could technically be a massive food exporter, completely self-sufficient, and still have a starving population if the people can't afford to buy what's grown in their own backyards.
We see that phenomenon globally all the time. Pakistan is frequently cited as a country that produces immense amounts of food, but struggles with severe undernourishment due to extreme income inequality.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, so by chasing absolute self-sufficiency in crops their climate cannot support, Iranian policymakers placed this crushing burden on the environment. They essentially traded the actual long-term food security of future generations for the political optics of hitting domestic production quotas today.
And if we look at the physical toll of that trade-off, that brings up the terrifying reality happening on the ground right now.
The environmental damage.
Yeah, because this massive economic inefficiency is causing a literal geographical collapse. The environment isn't just stressed, it is physically giving way.
The extraction of groundwater has been so aggressive that it's causing severe land subsidence. The texts actually describe this phenomenon as a silent earthquake.
A silent earthquake? Walk me through the mechanics of that. Why does pumping water cause the ground to act like an earthquake?
Sure. So think of an aquifer, like a massive underground geological sponge.
Okay, a sponge.
Right. The water inside doesn't just sit in an empty pool. It fills all these microscopic pores in the rock and the soil, providing outward pressure that helps support the weight of the earth above it.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, when you aggressively pump that water out faster than rainfall can replenish it, you remove that structural support. The sponge dries out, the pores just collapse under the weight of the land, and the ground physically sinks.
Meaning even if you get a historically massive rainy season the next year, it doesn't matter. The storage capacity is permanently destroyed.
The damage is completely irreversible. You can't uncrush the sponge, and it destroys infrastructure, it buckles roads, cracks building foundations, and permanently ruins the agricultural viability of the land itself.
Man, and the human toll of this physical collapse is staggering. The demographic data in the documents shows that between 2002 and 2017, over 12,000 Iranian villages were entirely deserted.
12,000.
12,000 communities just abandoned due to drought and water scarcity. And where did all those people go?
Well, it has triggered this environmental migration crisis on a really unprecedented scale. We see this most acutely in places like Khuzestan province.
Because the rivers are drying up there.
Exactly. The drying of major arteries like the Karkay and Karun rivers has simply made farming an impossibility in vast swaths of that region.
And those displaced families, they don't just vanish into thin air.
No, they don't.
The sources detail how this mass exodus drives rural populations into urban slums around major cities. You take independent farmers, you strip them of their livelihoods, and you push them into dense urban areas without adequate housing or sanitation or job prospects.
It's a textbook recipe for intense social instability.
It really is. It creates a cascading societal failure.
And, while it's a natural reflex to blame all of this on a warming planet, the researchers are definitive on a crucial point here.
Which is?
Climate change and natural aridity absolutely multiply the stress. There's no denying that. But Iran's water crisis is overwhelmingly political in its origin.
Right.
It is the direct downstream consequence of agricultural over-extraction and that rigid ideology of self-sufficiency. It is fundamentally a human-made disaster.
So, okay, if the ground is literally sinking and 12,000 villages are just empty, the natural question for anyone listening is, Why is the government still subsidizing the water pumps?
Right, why not just stop?
Yeah. Why hasn't anyone just turned off the tap who is actually benefiting from this broken system?
Well, the sources outline this systemic governance trap. They describe it as a strategic deadlock. The agricultural sector is caught in this debilitating tug-of-war between inefficient state intervention and uncontrolled, chaotic liberalization.
A deadline.
Yeah, and the specific mechanism preventing reform is a severe case of regulatory capture.
Regulatory capture, okay, meaning the agencies designed to regulate the market have been co-opted by the very industries they're supposed to be policing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The decision-making apparatus is entirely captured by vested interests. We are talking about state-affiliated agribusinesses, massive landowners, and politically connected networks.
They're the ones reaping the benefits.
Exactly. They reap the financial benefits of the status quo, the artificially cheap water and the cheap energy. And because they hold the levers of power, any attempt to reform the system or introduce real market pricing faces massive entrenched resistance from the top down.
But there have been attempts at reform, right? I'm looking at the 2010 targeted subsidy reform highlighted in the text.
Yes, that was a major initiative.
The stated goal was to replace those indirect subsidies, the cheap fuel and water, with direct cash transfers to citizens.
That was the plan.
And on paper, I mean, that sounds like a smart market-based solution. Give people the cash, let the water prices rise to their natural level, and let the market sort it out. Why did that fail so badly?
Well, it was billed as a major economic surgery. But the mechanism of a cash transfer relies entirely on a stable macroeconomic environment, and that just didn't exist.
Inflation.
Huge inflation. The impact of those direct payments was almost immediately obliterated by rampant inflation and severe currency devaluation.
Because if the government hands me, say, 100,000 rials today, but inflation is running at 50%, my cash transfer buys half as much fertilizer next year. The reform just evaporates.
It completely evaporates. And it wasn't just macroeconomic headwinds either. It was a fundamental failure of systemic trust.
What do you mean by that?
Take the state-run digital system called Bazarga, which was launched to manage agricultural inputs and outputs. It was an utter disaster.
Did the tech not work?
The tech was fine, but it was a centralized digital tool captured by the exact same market power dynamics that ruined the physical market.
How so? The same powerful players just manipulated the app.
Essentially, yes. Farmers were mandated to hand over incredibly sensitive commercial data, their yields, their inputs, their land sizes, and they had to give it to a centralized state entity that was also a market participant.
Oh, that's a massive conflict of interest.
Huge. So the producers viewed it not as a modernization tool to help them, but as a surveillance tool designed to control them, set unfair price ceilings, and squeeze their margins.
So they just refused to use it properly.
Right. It completely fractured any remaining trust between the farmer and the state.
This paints an incredibly bleak picture. I mean, you have a physical collapse driven by an ideological obsession, and every time someone tries to fix it, the reform is hijacked by inflation or corruption.
It is bleak.
But here is where the research really pivots, and where it gets genuinely fascinating.
Yeah.
Because the authors aren't just throwing their hands up saying the government needs to try harder.
No, they take a very structural approach.
Right. Knowing that past reforms failed due to centralized corruption, they propose a radically different architecture for a future democratic transition. They arguing that the entire machine needs to be disassembled and rebuilt from scratch.
They advocate for a complete paradigm shift. They outline what they call the hybrid adaptive governance model, or HAGM.
HEM. Okay.
And the core philosophy here is moving away from a centralized authority trying to guess the perfect policy, and instead building a dynamic system that actually has the mechanics to make transparent, adaptable decisions.
The sources divide this AGM framework into 4 pillars. Let's break these down, starting with the institutional pillar. What does that actually look like on the ground?
So the institutional foundation requires the creation of an independent regulatory authority, an IRA.
Okay.
Currently, the government acts as both the star player and the referee in the agricultural market. The IRA would be engineered with strict anti-capture mechanisms. It wouldn't dictate crop prices or production quotas.
We would do that.
It acts purely as a market architect, enforcing fair play, protecting independent producers, and drawing inspiration from successful bodies like the Canada Grain Commission.
Okay, I have to pause you there, because setting up an independent regulatory authority in a heavily centralized, traditionally authoritarian system sounds like a fantasy.
It's definitely a massive hurdle.
Yeah, how on earth do you guarantee this new authority actually stays independent and doesn't just get captured by a new group of elites?
It's the most critical vulnerability in the entire model. The authors fully acknowledge that this framework is designed as a blueprint for a transitional democratic phase.
Ah, transitional.
Yes, it requires a structural firewall, meaning the IRA's funding and leadership appointments must be entirely decoupled from the ministries that manage trade or state-owned farms. Without that constitutional-level separation of powers, the IRA just becomes another hollow bureaucracy.
Right, it just becomes another acronym. Okay, assuming that structural firewall holds, we move to the analytical pillar. This addresses how the IRA actually makes its decisions.
Exactly, because historically it's been opaque backroom deals.
Yeah. The HAGM introduces a multi-layered decision engine using complex mathematical modeling, and it specifically highlights techniques like D-metal ANP and Shannon entropy.
Yes, those are key.
Now, don't just throw acronyms at me. I'm not a statistician. How do these tools actually change a policy decision in the real world?
Let's break down the mechanics. Traditional policymaking often looks at problems in isolation. D-metal ANP, which stands for Decision-Making Trial and Evaluation Laboratory based on Analytic Network Process.
Wow. Okay.
I know it's a mouthful, but it is basically a mathematical way to map a spider web of consequences. Instead of just noting that variable A affects variable B, this model calculates how A affects B, which then loops back to alter C, which then impacts A again.
Oh, I see. So if a regulator wants to increase the price of chemical fertilizer, the model doesn't just calculate the immediate cost to the farmer.
Right.
It maps how that price hike might force a farmer to switch to a totally different crop, which then alters regional water consumption, which then impacts local employment rates.
You've got the concept perfectly. It creates a reproducible scientific map of cause and effect, and then you layer in Shannon entropy.
Okay, what is Shannon entropy?
In information theory, entropy measures the amount of unpredictability or surprise in a set of data.
Unpredictability.
Yeah. In this policy framework, it's used as a weighting mechanism. It basically prevents regulators from basing massive decisions on noisy, unreliable data.
Like corrupt data.
Exactly. If a specific variable has high entropy, meaning the data is chaotic or untrustworthy, maybe because local officials are lying about their crop yields, the model mathematically reduces the weight of that variable in the final decision.
That is brilliant. It strips away the noise and forces the policy to rely only on solid, reliable information. It replaces a politician's gut feeling with a transparent, defensible algorithm.
It's all about transparency.
I love that. Which brings us to the third pillar, the digital framework.
Oh.
This directly targets the failure of that Bazarga app we talked about earlier.
Yes, and they propose the Iran Agriculture Data Cooperative, or IADC.
And this is perhaps the most innovative mechanism in the blueprint, isn't it?
I think so. Because the failure of past digital systems was a failure of governance, not software. The state hoarded the data. The IADC flips that dynamic entirely, operating on the principle of data sovereignty.
Data sovereignty.
Yes. The ownership, access, and control of the data remain legally with the producer unions and agricultural associations.
It's essentially a data trust fund for farmers. Think about how revolutionary that is for them.
It changes the entire power dynamic.
Right. Instead of surrendering your crop yields to a captured state entity that's going to use that information to set an artificially low price ceiling, the farmers pool their data voluntarily. They use that aggregate data to negotiate better bulk rates for seeds or to predict regional market shortages before they even happen. They retain all their leverage.
Exactly. The regulatory authority simply sets the data standards, like the interoperability rules, the privacy guardrails, but the producers own the actual assets. By separating the regulator from the data owner, you begin to rebuild systemic trust.
And trust is the required fuel for the fourth and final pillar.
Yeah.
The political implementation.
Because the most beautiful mathematical model in the world is completely useless if you can't actually deploy it in a messy political reality full of vested interests.
So true. So what's the political roadmap look like?
The political pillar offers a very pragmatic approach. You don't attempt a nationwide overhaul overnight. You engineer a political coalition through rigorous, phased pilot programs.
Start small.
Yes. And the sources advocate for evaluating these pilots using a statistical mechanism called difference in differences.
Difference in differences. How does it work in practice?
It's a way to isolate the actual impact of your policy from the chaotic noise of the real world. So imagine you want to test a new water pricing model.
Okay.
You select Province A, to implement the reform, and you select Province B, which has a really similar climate and economy, to serve as the control group. You don't just look at whether water use in Province A went down after the reform.
Because if there was a massive national drought that year, water use would have gone down anyway.
Exactly. Instead, you measure the difference in the change between the two provinces. If water use dropped by 10% in the control group due to the drought, but it dropped by 30% in your reform province,
then that 20% difference is the true isolated effect of your policy.
you got it. It's a massive, rigorous clinical trial for economic policy. Once you prove, empirically, that the reform actually increases farmer profit margins and saves water in one province, you build undeniable grassroots support.
And then you use that local success to generate the political momentum needed to scale it nationally and crush the resistance of those entrenched elites.
It turns reform from an ideological debate into an empirical reality.
So we have this transparent, data-driven, mathematically sound governance structure. But at the end of the day, someone still has to put seeds in the actual dirt.
The physical reality of farming.
Yeah, the conversation has to shift to what the farming of the future looks like under this new system. The sources point to a massive strategic pivot in what Iran should actually be growing.
Right. The pivot is moving away from the water-guzzling commodities that define the self-sufficiency era, like wheat, and transitioning toward climate-resilient, high-value exports where Iran holds a massive comparative advantage in the global market.
Like what?
The focus shifts to pistachios, saffron, dates, and medicinal plants.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's the difference between trying to grow a cheap commodity that destroys your aquifer versus growing a premium product that requires a fraction of the water, selling it at a massive premium globally, and then just using a portion of those profits to import the wheat you need.
Exactly. It completely resolves that food security versus self-sufficiency debate. It's transitioning to a trading agriculture mindset.
But expanding the footprint of cultivated land to achieve this is no longer an option, right? The environment just can't take it.
No, there's no more land or water to expand into. So the actual methods of farming must undergo a severe technological modernization to maximize the efficiency of the land they are already using.
And the texts get into the specific mechanisms of this tech pivot, don't they?
They do. We are talking about the widespread integration of precision agriculture. This involves utilizing satellite multispectral imagery, AI-driven soil sensors, and automated drip systems.
Wow, real high-tech stuff.
Yeah, the goal is to deliver exactly the right amount of water and nutrients to an individual plant, rather than just flooding an entire field and losing half of it to evaporation.
Yeah.
It also requires a massive structural investment in treating and reusing municipal wastewater for irrigation, which forces a transition toward a circular water economy.
But the detail that really stuck with me is that you can bring in all the AI algorithms and satellite arrays in the world, but this transition isn't just a hardware upgrade.
Not at all.
It demands a profound social shift. The sources are absolutely adamant that a sustainable democratic future must actively empower the marginalized groups who have historically been sidelined from the agricultural economy.
The social dimension is the linchpin of the whole thing. For instance, women are the primary agricultural producers in many of Iran's rural areas, particularly in the really labor-intensive cultivation of rice and traditional crops.
Right.
Yet they face systemic legal barriers to land ownership, access to commercial credit, and technological extension services.
Which is crazy, because if you deny the primary laborers access to capital, you are artificially capping the entire nation's yield. If they can't get a loan to buy that new drip irrigation system, the farm fails.
Precisely. A modern system has to grant them equal legal access to these resources.
And the youth factor is equally critical here. You have an aging farmer population and thousands of villages turning to dust. Who is going to calibrate the soil sensors and manage the data cooperatives?
The researchers argue that the youth must be retrained and integrated not just as manual laborers, but as the operators, data analysts, and financial managers of this new economy.
You have to make it a viable career.
Exactly. You have to transform farming from a desperate generational struggle for survival into a modern, high-tech career path. Rebuilding the degraded natural capital is simply impossible without simultaneously rebuilding the human capital.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by dissecting how a rigid, destructive ideology of absolute food self-sufficiency, fueled by subsidized water extraction, led Iran into a terrifying state of water bankruptcy.
And we explored the mechanics of land subsidence, the collapsing geological sponge, and the resulting mass migration that empties villages and destabilizes cities.
Yeah. And then we broke down the comprehensive blueprint for escaping that trap, the hybrid adaptive governance model, a framework built on an independent regulatory firewall, the transparent mathematics of Demittel AMP and Shannon entropy, the data sovereignty of the IADC, and phased, evidence-based political rollouts.
All leading to a strategic pivot toward high-value exports and precision technology.
And, as we wrap this up, the implications here extend far beyond Iran's borders. Whether you are working in public policy, running a business, or just trying to understand global supply chains, this deep dive is really a masterclass in systems thinking.
It really is.
It proves that governance, environmental stewardship, and basic behavioral economics are completely inextricably linked. You cannot break one node in the network without the entire web vibrating.
It highlights a universal truth about systemic change. You cannot simply engineer your way out of a political problem, and you cannot legislate your way out of strict ecological limits.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the currency of any successful national reform isn't money, and it isn't even water. It is systemic trust. If the producer doesn't trust the state, the most brilliant technological policies in the world will just fail.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought inspired by these sources. We've seen the direct mechanism of how environmental degradation fuels unemployment, which drives mass urban migration, which inevitably ignites intense social instability.
The cascading failure.
Right. It makes you wonder, in highly centralized, resistant regimes, could the ultimate catalyst for political transformation actually be the depletion of natural resources? Before the politicians ever decide to voluntarily evolve, will the collapsing environment itself eventually force their hand? Think about that.